Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee. My name is Councillor Wayne Bridges. I'm chairman of this meeting. And welcome to those this evening who are watching live on the YouTube channel broadcast. Can I remind everyone around the table this evening that you will be recorded, so please ensure your microphone buttons are switched on. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening, so if one does sound, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. Mobile phones and devices to be placed on silent or switched off. And if we have residents in the public gallery this evening, we do have feedback forms available at the back of the room, or if you're watching on YouTube, you will find it at the bottom of the broadcast. Can I take the apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Scott Farley, with Councillor Nelson West substituting.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to Councillor Nelson West. Any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting? No. Next item is to receive the minutes of the previous meeting. We confirm is correct. Thank you. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1, which brings us on to the main agenda, and I will be moving item 5 in place of our minor review. So we'll be taking the minor review first, and then the budget planning report, and then we'll resume the rest of the agenda. So with that said, we go on to our select committee minor review, the empty homes council tax premium, and I'll ask Liz at this stage to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So at the July meeting, on the 21st of July, the Select Committee received a report on the empty properties council tax premium and the empty dwelling management orders. So at that meeting, a number of items were mentioned, one of which was that it is now possible to increase the council tax premium payable on properties that have been empty for more than 2 years, non-exempt properties that have been empty for more than 2 years, from the current 150% of the normal council tax to 200%. So this was something that the committee considered, and the committee was minded to look into this a bit further and to consider the feasibility of doing so and what the benefits or repercussions would be of doing that. So a scoping report was prepared, which was agreed offline by the committee, and subsequent to that, the witness session was arranged for this evening to take part as part of this evening's meeting. So we have witnesses today. Officers are in attendance from finance and also from the housing policy team to give information, to answer questions, and we also have an external witness who is a resident in the borough who's very kindly agreed to attend and to give evidence as to what it's like from her perspective living in proximity to a house that has been empty for a considerable amount of time. So with that in mind, I think the best way to go forward would be perhaps to ask our local resident, Tina, just to tell us a little bit about her own experience, and then officers can interject, and we can ask the members if you have any questions for you as well as necessary. So thank you. If I could hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I've lived next to an empty building for 13 years, and that's how long I've resided in my property, and I think, probably a little bit of hearsay, but I think it's been probably empty several years before that as well. Our understanding is that it was a family that are fighting over probate, so I believe that the owners died, and then I think there's been issues about who owns the property, and in that time the house has just deteriorated. There's no way that it's habitable. I've contacted Councillor Bridges on quite a regular basis. The garden is extremely overgrown, and I think we've sort of been requesting that it's being cut twice a year, I think. But even then, it just looks horrible, if that's the right phrase I can use. It's beginning because when the garden overgrows, it pushes onto our property, so it's impacting our fences, things like weeding, which sounds probably quite minor, but when you're doing it on a regular basis, I'd like to think we take quite a lot of pride in our house, and we've invested quite a lot of money in it over the last few years. We've done an extension, but I think with the house next door to it, my main concern is that it's impacting the value of my property. I'm in a mid-terrace, so the house that's in question is at the end. So I have another house next to me and another one and so we're in the middle. We've had rats. I do live behind allotments, so it could be a factor of that. We did have people come around and they do think it came from next door. Doesn't mean it was because of next door, but it did find a way in because it was empty and the boiler had been ripped out, so they think it found a hole between the walls. We recently had, I think, a heavy rains last winter, and the pipe next door must have got dislodged in the wind, and then all the rain was coming onto our property, and it leaked through into our extension. We didn't notice it for a while, but then we managed to get someone to come around and look at it. But obviously everything's at our cost. If it had been on the other side, then obviously we would have had that conversation with our neighbours, and it may come to some sort of arrangement. It doesn't look nice. There's now been a bit of a dumping ground as well. Just passing there today, someone dumped like a child's toy. So it's just getting into a position where we're also been here 13 years. Me and my partner are now considering whether to move out of Hillingdon, just move on. And we're concerned that next door is going to impact us selling our property because no one would want to buy next to that, and because it has deteriorated so much in the last 13 years. So I have a feeling that it's even more impacting us now than our future, as well as all the damage that it's doing. Yeah, I think that's what I got.
Thank you very much, Tina. Before I invite the officers to give their presentations, I'll just stop and ask members if they have any questions for Tina at this point. There may be some later, so in which case we'll move on to the officers if they wish to give their comments.
Yes, so I think, so I suppose, reflecting back on, I suppose, our initial work on the scoping paper off the back of the previous committee meeting. So we're looking at the scope to which we can use the council tax empty homes premium as effectively an extra lever to disincentivise properties being held vacant in the borough. It's definitely something that we've got sort of scope to do to make use of as a mechanism. So I suppose what we've set out within the scoping report, and we can expand on in terms of the specific queries about how that would operate going forward and how it might work. We've sort of come prepared to kind of expand upon that for committee members this evening. But I think really, yeah. So I suppose the key mechanism we've got there in terms of the empty homes premium is by putting that surcharge on council tax, just to make sure that actually that cost of holding an empty property is that little bit higher, with the intention that impacts on behaviours and encourages people to, I suppose, make a better use of the property, if that's the way to put it.
Thank you very much. Maureen, would you like to say anything?
Well, in respect of, obviously, the specific property, can't comment. I obviously have my commiserations, because obviously that's a horrible situation that you find yourself in. In terms of council tax, obviously we can only charge the premium to properties that are long-term empty and unfurnished. I'm not too sure about this particular property and whether that's being charged a premium because of that situation, but there are there are certain criteria that allow us to charge the premium. Not all empty properties can be charged a premium. For instance, if we were to find that property was furnished, legally we cannot charge the premium to the owners. There are circumstances when we are able to charge the premium that it becomes very difficult, and I think in this particular case the ladies mentioned there's a lot of probate issues. That is one of the difficulties we find with long-term empty properties and trying to collect monies from long-term empty properties, because we first have to ascertain who's liable, and following deaths in some cases, because obviously this is a normal thing in the borough. We do have a turnover of properties due to deaths of the owners. In general, that's not an issue. We have a team that will look at those properties, monitor the position with regard to probate, and ensure that we collect the monies due from the estate. The difficulties arise where there are problems identifying probate, identifying maybe that the owners or the beneficiaries live abroad, where there's family disputes and no one's taking responsibility for properties. So those are the types of issues that we have when dealing with long-term empty properties. And it's quite resource intensive, if you like, to try and get round those problems, identify who to charge, and then subsequently take recovery action, which potentially could lead to a charging order and a forced sale. But that's a very expensive route for the council to take. And ideally we'd like to find other routes and resolve the problems at an earlier stage.
Thank you very much. Debbie, would you like to comment?
So first of all, I think, as my colleagues have said, obviously we can't get into the detail of the specifics in this instance. But
my apologies, Debbie. Sorry, Molly, would you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you.
I really do feel for you. It's an awful situation to be in, and I think that we do need to sort of undertake to sort of take the particular case back and look again at exploring all of the options to see, you know, precisely just what options are available to us and whether there is further action that we can take, including getting some, you know, legal advice on the kind of potential options, because I know they are very complicated, and I think in general with empty properties, I think the approach that we want to take in most instances is to work with owners and negotiate with them in order to bring things back. And I think with most, we're talking about even the, you know, long term defined as 6 months plus, but even the kind of reasonably longer term ones are still much shorter than the sort of period that we're talking about. But in those types of instances, then clearly the problems are much more entrenched, and we do need to look at the enforcement options that are available to us as well. And we will definitely go back and look into this specific case. As far as the council tax premium is concerned, I think from a housing perspective, obviously we want to bring as much pressure to bear to bring empty properties back into use as much as we can. As we've been through before, I think really it's not, the numbers involved aren't sufficient to generate lots of extra council income through council tax, but if there's a significant increase in the council tax that's going to be paid, then the hope is that would at least put some pressure on, additional pressure on owners to bring empties back into use. So it's really from that kind of perspective that this has been looked at. In terms of how successful that is, certainly a lot of other boroughs are charging the maximum. Certainly if you look around West London, the vast majority of them are. But I've researched as far as I can, and I can't find any systematic evaluation of the success in doing so, or really even any anecdotal evidence as to the success. So that's not to say that it hasn't been successful, but there's just nothing there to look at really in terms of how successful it has been.
Thank you very much. I'll now invite members to ask questions. So, Councillor Gardner, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, Tina. I'm sure that what the officer said was cold comfort to you after 13 years. I know what I'd be saying, wouldn't be polite. There must be some proper enforcement options to be done. I mean, 13 years is ridiculous. You know, I mean, probate, yeah, you can sometimes a couple of years maybe at the most, but 13 years, well, I mean, isn't there any option for us to compulsory purchase a property?
So, we can't get into the specifics, but my understanding is that probate issues are probably still an issue. And one of the things that we want to go away and look at is the extent to which there is action that we can take if probate hasn't been settled. And I'd need to take a legal view really on what the options are around that.
Councillor Garner, would you like a follow-up? Are you happy with the answer? Okay. Councillor Punjar. Okay. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Could you let could you let me know how many homes currently attract the empty property premium of 150%, please?
Yes, that's 144 currently,
Thank you.
which is slightly down on the report that was submitted in the summer due to some work that we did throughout the summer and identifying occupied properties. So I think it was 163 originally, it's now down to 144.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah. Going back to probate, the case of death and probate, how can the debt recovery be expedited? Because I've got a property not far from where I live. The lady passed away, and I don't think she's got any family, and it's empty. The council have very kindly cut the grass back, the front lawn, things like that, but it needs constant attention, and neighbours are complaining because it goes over their fence and things like that, and they can't get to it. Excuse me. So,
well, each case when we come to it is different. I mean, in a normal case, the family would, if somebody died intestate, they'd get letters of administration, but a probate would be applied for, and normally either there's a transfer or a sale of the property. The difficulty arises when there may be nobody who is going to inherit or is aware of the property, and we can't identify any person to take responsibility, so the owner still is the deceased, and we can't obviously take any action then. We cannot charge council tax until probate has been decided, so they get an exemption until probate and 6 months after, which in normal cases is to allow for the activity to take place, people not to be penalised by it, and then allow a time for the sale of the property 6 months after probate. Unfortunately, there are cases where somebody responsible can't be identified, and we have to make inquiries, and those are time-consuming and costly, and sometimes very difficult to establish a liable party.
okay, thank you.
Councillor Smallwood?
Thank you, Chair. Two points. One, is the cost of investigating some of these issues, does it outweigh the sort of the yield that we get? You know, is it value for money? It's positive to see we're bringing money in, but if we're then spending all that money investigating the few, it almost becomes cost neutral. And then the second one is, do we have a breakdown of the reasons that these properties are empty or they are currently doing a yield? You know, I thought very interesting from the witness that there was a probate issue and it's been going on for a long time, but it's not always going to be a probate issue. It may be a multitude of other things. Have we got kind of a breakdown of the 144? How many are fit into? I know it's not easy to put everything just into little boxes, but if we could keep broad boxes, do we do that?
We have a breakdown in so much there's about 60% of the properties that we're charging premiums to are charged to companies or public organisations. For instance, a flat above a shop, a property associated with a bank, and the company have decided to leave it unoccupied. The 40% that we have could be for a variety of reasons. Properties dilapidated, there are mental health issues when we're dealing with the clients. Probate, not probate so much as post-probate, because once the property transfers or probate is granted, then it's up to the beneficiaries to do something with it. It's identifying who's going to take responsibility and deal with the council tax, occupy it, deal with it and sell it. And those sorts of issues come out, and we investigate those and try to remedy the situation wherever possible. But there's a variety of reasons for the remaining 40% of privately owned properties.
You have a follow-up, Councillor Smallwood?
Just on the yield and whether it's value for money to do it, but also the difference between that 60 and 40% I think is very interesting, right? The 40% I guess is the concerns for Tina and others, where that's kind of the area of most concern. If a shop decides it's got a flat above it and it's decided not to rent out the flat, well, that's kind of, that's a business decision and a commercial decision for that individual. I would welcome there being more affordable homes in the borough, but ultimately, it may be that there's a change of use. It may be a clothes shop and then turn into, I don't know, a kebab shop, and they might decide that is no longer appropriate for us to have it. So I guess the 40% is where we want to focus, and just some more information on the work we are doing around sort of family homes to try and bring them back into usage, but also around the yield and whether it's value for money chasing it.
It's certainly more resource intensive, and if we were to pursue it to the end and obtain a charging order, if we were able to identify the liable party and then pursue it to the end, obtain a charging order and force a sale, that can cost us sometimes more than the debt that we're charging.
Thank you very much. Any other member? Councillor Punjar.
Sorry, I just wonder whether actually the 60% that should be followed up, because if it's a commercial decision, then that's actually an easier and less cost-effective decision for a council to follow up on, because you've got access to the company. If the company is choosing to keep that empty property, it's banking on the value of the property increasing rather than creating a home in that property. Whereas if it's a probate issue, then you've got to go through the investigations of that. So the easier option and the most cost-effective option, surely, for the council would be to look at the 60%, not to not look at the 40% at all, but to actually make sure that the 60% is bringing in the yield so that you can allocate costs to the 40%. Because if banks are holding properties and they're waiting for the acceleration of that property in terms of the price of the property, then they're keeping it empty, as we see around the borough, where commercial properties and private and homes are being kept empty so they can bank on the value of that property going up rather than creating homes. And that's actually not what we want to do, surely, because we need homes.
Yes, I accept. I mean, obviously, current circumstances changing, but yes, I accept that. So if we were to increase the council tax premium and it would affect those properties would be generally easier for my team to collect.
Do you have a follow-up?
No.
Okay. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine's actually just a bit of a follow-up from Councillor Smallwood's question regarding the yield. I understand that all our neighbouring boroughs have already implemented this. Are you in communication with the departments in those neighbouring boroughs? Is there any? I mean, one of the concerns here was that yes, we'd bring in extra revenue, but it might be more difficult to chase that revenue. Have we seen examples or sort of trends happening where this revenue is coming in, or similarly where it isn't, or it's been harder to chase? Is there any communication on that front? Thanks.
These new increases are relatively new from 2019-20. Obviously, the collection of council tax and other taxes, local taxes, has been impacted greatly by COVID. So I think any analysis at this time wouldn't be particularly useful, because generally collection rates have been affected.
Okay. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me, excuse me, how the proposed increase is likely to impact on the housing stock, please? Thank you.
And I think, obviously, any extra property that we can bring back into use is another dwelling that's being occupied instead of being left empty. And the general hope is that if we did implement the increase, that at least some of those dwellings that are empty currently would come back into use. The likelihood is that most of those would be kind of general private sector properties. I mean, clearly from a housing strategy perspective, it's kind of affordable housing that we're most interested in, and there is the kind of potential to combine with other kind of elements that would help to bring back properties for affordable housing as well, but that again would require some investment from the council in terms of grants to do that. So on its own, the extent to which it would bring properties back, I think in terms of numbers, we really can't say until it's been sort of tried and tested.
Do you have a further?
No, I haven't. Thank you.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you. I just want to move back to, whilst recognising Councillor Punger's point that the 60% is the easy bit, and Maureen, you admitted that actually the bit that concerns me is that 40% because it impacts Tina, right? It's easy to have a commercial decision and make that. And we may disagree with someone's commercial decision, but they get to make it. What support can we give to people like Tina who face these day-to-day problems, especially where there is things like rats or the property and the roof? If it's a detached house or a row of three, getting the roof fixed. Usually if my house goes wrong, I go and have a chat with my neighbour and we club in together and get the chimney sorted. But if you don't know who the neighbour is, that's a little bit more difficult. So what kind of support are we offering to residents that face these scenarios? And it'd be interesting to hear maybe from Maureen and then from Tina.
In terms of support, obviously, as revenues manager, I'm collecting the finances. I'm not equipped to provide support other than obviously this lever that could potentially, if it was in the circumstances met the criteria, we could try to encourage the next door to engage with us. But the difficulties are, as I said before, if we're in this situation where we've got no option of engaging, very little that my team can do, but obviously within the council we have other teams, and I know that the antisocial behaviour team helps residents to clear some of the problems, and I understand they've been cutting your grass, as you said, or the grass next door, but that sort of support, I'm not aware of any other support that is provided.
So the responsibility for empty properties at the moment sits with the private sector housing team at the council, and the action that they would take would sort of depend on the individual circumstances of the case. I think over the next few months, over the work of this committee previously, we've said that we will go away and re-look at the approach to empty homes altogether and produce a new strategy in relation to that. So that work will be taking place kind of early into 2023. And I think we really do need to do a lot more kind of research and looking at what's been successful for other boroughs within that. I mean, in very broad terms, the kind of approach that we're thinking about at the moment is very much, as I said before, to target the ones that are kind of early and easy in terms of an approach where it's around negotiating with people and really just keeping in touch with them and geeing people along to bring empty properties back and telling them what their options are. We would like to look at the costs and potential benefits around employing officers to do some of that legwork, because it is quite resource intensive type of work bringing empties back, and also whether there's potential in terms of grant funding and what that would mean in terms of the cost and the potential benefits to the council, and whether that could be tied to nominations for homeless families, for instance. And then at the other end of the scale, there's the sort of enforcement activity. You know, the private sector housing team obviously have all of the legal enforcement powers there in place at the moment, so there's powers that they have. There's also things that ASBIT can do as well. But at the moment, the team is generalist, so there aren't people within that team who specialise just in empty properties. So there's a question to be looked at around that as well, and whether there's kind of other ways where we can kind of up the profile, I guess, is really around dealing with empties. But what I would say, and of course there are powers around compulsory purchase, around empty dwelling management orders, around enforced sales. And I'm not an expert in any of them, but I do know enough to know that none of them are straightforward at all, and there are potential costs involved with some of them. So, for instance, with empty dwelling management orders, the council would put in funding to bring a property back up to standard, and then they would take over management of it. But there isn't a guarantee that you get your investment back at the end of it. So there are pitfalls for the council in terms of the investment required as well. But how that relates specifically to each of those individual items, I think, to be honest, we need to do some more research into it and understand the legalities and the costs and how other boroughs have got on with it.
We've got Councillor Small next, but I see Tina's indicating, so perhaps you'd like to say something.
Is there a cap? So obviously I'm talking very specific, and I can understand that the purpose of this conversation is also to bring revenue back towards the council and the borough. But I see next door to me, obviously I'm being very specific to this one, but I know that obviously I've spoken with Councillor Bridges, and the grass is being cut 2 or 3 times a year, which I assume no one's doing out the kindness of their heart. There's a cost for all this. So surely a house like that is costing the borough and the council more money. Maybe not, we're not talking thousands, but obviously if you've got several then it adds up and sort of defeats the object of what you're trying to achieve. So is there a cap of saying, if this is still in probate, which is what I'm assuming it is, because it's been so long, can the council say, if this isn't resolved in 20 years from death, that they can take ownership of it or something? Because I just don't, for me with this house, I don't see what the end is. And I know that's obviously not everyone's problem here, but it's, where does this end? Does it have to fall down before it's sort of no one's problem, if that makes sense? And it's, and it's not a nice view, but I think because we're in this position, it's like anything we've noticed. You notice these houses now wherever you go, whether it's in the borough or outside of the borough. I actually think what you're trying to achieve, I think actually does make sense, because obviously I'm impacted by it. So I think, anything to get people living in houses and get them, back and looking, in line with others does make sense. But I'm just wondering if there is a cap that we can say, after X amount of years, the council's got more rights towards it.
I don't think it's going to be possible to say in quite that way. I think we need to look in kind of strategic terms around, in general, which types of approaches are most costly, which types of approaches are most successful, and get some understanding at that level. But ultimately, I think with something like empty homes, a lot of it is going to come down to the individual case, what's happening on that specific case, and what are the costs and benefits around that, and what options do you have. I think we just need to sort of dig into that.
Councillor Smallwood, to finish on your follow-up.
Thank you, Chair. Just I think there's very clearly mechanisms that are quite simple on the commercial side that, we could be here all night debating the rights and the wrongs of it, but they seem relatively easy for the council to deal with and follow up in the vast majority of cases. Before we get to the compulsory purchase, there's obviously a period of time which people like Tina are facing that is obviously thing, and I think part of this scope and this review, we should be really looking into that, about the support that we can offer. It doesn't feel to me, looking at the numbers, like this is a huge number of properties where we have these sort of very extreme cases, but there doesn't really seem to be sort of like any mechanisms that people can go down, and whether there's good practice out there that other councils have done that we could look at, I think would be incredibly important to this work, even if that means ways that councils have sped up compulsory purchase, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that should really take a big part of this review.
Thank you, Councillor Smallwood. I'll comment on that in a moment. I'll go to Councillor Gardner with her questions.
Well, first I ever heard that Asbit did grass cutting, and just as that went well. Tina, has anybody, apart from Councillor Bridges, given you a contact number at the Civic to ring, the private sector housing team or whatever, do you just take every problem as it comes and then deal with it in isolation? Because I personally think you should have a named contact in the council that you should be able to get in contact with, and that applies for others that live next door to empty properties that are causing problems.
I think my main contact's in Councillor Bridges. He's been my main point of contact. So I think we've been talking for probably a few years now anyway. And I think we have gone through, I think when I have said we had rats, I can't remember the name of the departments, but he put me through to other departments. But I mean, if there is more of a direct contact route that I could take, then yeah, I'd embrace that and openly, I think, so I don't have to obviously go through council. I know you're busy and things get slowed down. We have had conversations. I think the problem with my house next door is the house next door to me is I don't think we can find out actually who owns it now. I think that's been sort of a lot of the issues as well. So I think people have been investigating it from the council, but that's probably us as well. But I think when anything has gone wrong, we're just sort of sorting it out ourselves, as opposed to, I don't want to keep saying to Councillor Bridges or the team, you know, that there's a pipe on our side. You just sort of, sometimes it's just easier to fix it yourself as well. I think there's that element of it for us. But I mean, if anyone's got a list of names for me, I'll take them.
I think you find a lot of your key contacts sitting next to you. Make notes of the name tags. Councillor Gardner, do you wish to say anything further?
Well, I think here, I mean, isn't there anything we can do to suggest that people in this sort of quandary have a named contact as a council officer?
I think in this particular case we have to be mindful that this is a minor review, and what we're looking at is the actual recommendation to increase to 150% to 200%. However, I do take the point, and as Debbie mentioned earlier, they are reviewing this in next year, was it? So what we could do as a committee is that when that review is completed, to bring it back to this committee to find out what they've discovered and what ways of working they're going to be doing differently, and at that point as a committee we can then comment on that, and if we want to bring it in as a major review after that, then I don't see why we couldn't. I don't think there's any restrictions on doing that. But for this particular item, this is just to discuss the actual council tax premium. But you're right, there are many other points. We can discuss this all night. There's so many different areas we can go down with empty homes. But yes, no, if you're happy with that as a committee, then I would advise we do that and wait to see what Debbie's team find first before going further with it. Yep.
Can I suggest, Tina, that you definitely grab some names of people here?
Tina, what I'll do is ask Liz to send you an email with the contact details for each officer, if that helps as well. Yep. Councillor Punja.
I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Smallwood and Councillor Gardner's comments about kind of this being a pathway into looking at how we can help that people like Tina and people in this situation. And in your review, would it be possible to kind of therefore look at a strategy and suggestions of what happens next, what happens next, what happens next? Because I think that kind of clarity is really, really important, rather than just a review of these councils do this and these councils do that. But there has to be kind of a pathway to progress for our council as well, so that if we've got a case like Tina's, then Tina knows that this is what happens here and this is what happens here, and us as councillors also know that that's the protocol too, so that we can advise our residents of the same thing. I think that would be really important.
Yep. Okay. I can't see any other members indicating, so at this point, perhaps Tina, you can close this by perhaps commenting any further if you wish to do so, but by all means, if you want to ask us any questions, feel free to do so.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's actually hopefully been very beneficial, Debbie, just to say. But I do appreciate your support. I just want to say I don't want it to be on a negative either. That I appreciate the council is very busy, and like any major business or department, you know, it takes a while to go through to get to the right channels. But hopefully, thank you, Councillor Bridges, for inviting me today, because that does help. But I do stand by. I think that the general purpose of this is obviously about the increase, and I think, I know it's very easy to say yes, increase something from, you know, up to 200%, but I think for what we've been through from a personal point of view, that if it brings a house back into society and it's lived in and it's warm, you know, the other thing that we haven't said is that also, like, I think a lot of our house probably heats next door, you know, there's empty gaps, and that's something this year that we're probably going to suffer from more. But but I think I wish you all luck, but thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you, Debbie.
Thank you very much, Tina. With that said, if I can just give members, going back to the recommendation, I do take the point that there are challenges with this. However, I think the challenges would be exactly the same whether it be 150% or 200%. If our neighbouring boroughs are charging extra at the full capacity they're entitled to do, I do not see a reason why we should be charging less. And therefore, as a recommendation, I would entirely endorse this and say as a committee that the recommendation from this review to the Cabinet member is that we increase this premium to 200%. And also on the point I made earlier that we will look at this next year once the officers have concluded their own internal review of this, where we could potentially assist them further with potential ideas and recommendations at that point. But in terms of this recommendation, that's my proposal, that we accept this and increase the premium and suggest that to the Cabinet member to implement. Is the committee happy with that? Councillor Small, did you indicate? Okay. Is that agreed? Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you for the officers for their presentations, and again, Tina, thank you very much for coming this evening. You may go. If you want to stay, you can stay throughout the whole thing, but we're going to be here all night, so that's fine. Thank you. Okay. As mentioned earlier, this was moved round on the agenda, so we're now going to look at the item 5, the budget planning report for services within the remit of the Resident Services Select Committee. And we welcome this evening Kerry and Ian. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead and give your presentation to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, just a bit of a cough. Yes, so this is the first of our 2 appearances as finance in front of the committee for the year. We come to this first appearance to really set out the context in which the budgets are being set for the 23-24 financial year and the medium term thereafter. We'll be back again in January once the Cabinet have presented but approved a set of budget proposals, and those are out for consultation both with the residents of the borough and with the select committees. At that time, I have to say Kerry will have a lot more to add, because this evening it's mainly on the context where I'm afraid I'm hogging the microphone and running through that section. But Kerry will be back in January to say more about specific proposals in this area. In terms of that financial context, I won't run through the report sort of verbatim or anything. I think we enter the budget setting cycle, I think, in a fairly strong position. We set a budget back in February 2022, whereby we had identified a sort of gap over the medium term of the order of about £35 million, of which about 30 million of that sum there were plans in place to bridge. So we were looking at about a sort of £5-6 million budget gap, which compared to sort of the position we found ourselves at the beginning of many budget cycles was a strong position. Where we I suppose face a greater challenge in this budget cycle is clearly the twin challenges of the sort of COVID-19 legacy costs that are impacting on a number of areas where the council's delivering services and the cost of delivering those services. Those legacies also materialise in terms of the impacts on some other public sector partners as well, whether it's the health service, whether it's in the court service, whereby actually we're seeing things we can't action as quickly as we previously could have done because of the impact of COVID-19 and backlogs that built up. The second item, and probably the more pressing item that's impacting and driving a greater challenge this year, is the inflation, high levels of inflation, including on energy costs, and the impact that's having on cost of living for residents in the borough. Between those two, we're expecting to see a more challenging budget setting cycle than we witnessed or have witnessed in the previous couple of years. The strategy for bridging that, in line with our kind of approach in previous years, is a keen focus on service transformation in terms of making sure that those things we are delivering for residents, we're delivering them as well as we can, and at lower cost. We are also then looking at areas like demand management, ensuring we have effective procurement, and looking at charging policies to make sure where appropriate we're recovering the full cost of services that are charged for rather than being funded from the general council tax. There is a bit more in the report, but that's all I was going to say for the moment, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ian. As I mentioned, this report's been around for a while now, as we had to cancel our last meeting, so hopefully members have plenty of time to read the reports. And with that said, is there any questions based on that? I can see no indications. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, service transformation is very important. One of the things we did recently was separating food waste, and we've all got those lovely little grey caddies. Recently, Councillor Gardner and Councillor Sullivan and I spent a morning together down at Arlington Depot, which was the best morning of my year so far. But one of the big things I heard that was very exciting was the amount of money that we have been able to save by doing that. I understand it's £900,000. I just wondered whether that and how we think that will impact in future years, and where that money is now being reinvested.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so we are definitely. I haven't got the figure to hand, but I'll confirm for the minutes in terms of where we've landed on the saving against that initiative. I think in a sense that's exactly the kind of thing we can do in terms of service transformation, because actually what we're doing is we're asking, we're saying to residents, actually here's a small change in the way we deliver this, or sort of maybe a more modern approach. And actually what that means is we're not putting that food waste through costly landfill costs, which actually gives nothing else to the resident other than a higher bill at the end of the day. I think in terms of reinvesting the savings, as far as we've not sort of hypothecated that one for any particular purpose. So I think in terms of that's contributing to that wider kind of strategy of actually how do we minimise costs in those areas of the cost council where we can, because then it lets us cover costs in those areas where actually demand is growing and inherently will grow. So even within sort of waste disposal, there'll be elements actually of the disposal costs of waste rise year on year because we've got more residents in the borough, and in a sense a lot of those measures, that's where the funding's going. It's going back into making sure we continue to provide those services.
Do you wish to have a follow-up, Councillor Smallwood?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Punjab.
I'm sure this will happen later on in your next visit or something, but when you talk about service transformation at lower costs, what kind of services are being transformed at lower costs, really? Because to have considerable savings, they have to be quite high services and high transformations. And when you talk about demand management, again, post-COVID, post-fact of what we are now in is another crisis. How does that impact now on what you've already set as a budget previously to then go on to go, well, let's see the forecast of where those demands are going to come from, because on a weekly basis our demands are changing as a borough. And we can see it on the streets, I'm sure, as every councillor can, amongst their residents. So how are we addressing those?
Thank you, Councillor. So yes, just to run through this in turn. So in terms of what kinds of services are we looking at transforming, delivering a different way, I'm afraid my slightly probably try respond to it is all of them in a sense, because actually one of our things is we really need to make sure that we understand how we're delivering value for money across everything that we're delivering. I mean, so in terms of what that might look like, so taking sort of the services within in my own area and on the more operational side. So when we look at, say, our revenues and benefits services, one of the big things we're doing there is looking at actually how can we make sure that rather than a traditional fill a form in, send it in, sort of therefore an officer sits and processes it, moves it from one system to another. Actually, it's about what can we do about self-service, because actually, in many cases when residents want to get in touch, they just want to understand what that, say, on those services, what is that benefit entitlement, what can they do to sort of review that, and actually if we can give them the tools to do that in a sort of self-service way, then actually that takes out a significant amount of back office processing work. I mean, that's the kind of thing that's what we'd look to mirror really across the board in terms of delivering those services. But as you say, yes, come January we'll be able to present back on the really specific proposals and how those would impact on the way we're delivering services in different areas. In terms of demand management, I think, as you say, so one of the big challenges we have actually is anticipating demand for services. There's all sorts of different pressures, sort of potential demands on what we're providing to residents. So one of the key things that comes out of our sort of monthly budget monitoring processes, and then a lot of the work we do gearing up for the bigger set piece kind of budget pieces of work a couple of times a year, is around really looking into that and modelling it. So a lot of close working between the finance team and the service department. So in terms of when we're talking about waste, actually we will be closely working with the waste service. So this isn't something the accountants are in a bubble doing. These are very much owned by the service departments, and that means we can make sure we're capturing actually if we are seeing a higher growth in waste tonnages, or if we're seeing increased demand for homelessness services in response to, say, wider economic pressures, then actually that's being fed in to the budget at the same time as looking at actually, well, if we do want to deliver this in a different way. So I don't know, say if we, taking the food waste, going back to the food waste, in a sense, we know there's more food waste because there's more people in the borough, but actually that means that we're potentially looking at greater savings to come from those measures because we've got more food waste we can divert.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Punjab?
I do, actually. What I would like to know, what I'd like to have noted is that contingency costs for those demand managements, because I would like to think that there are contingencies, especially in light of the current economic crisis, that we as a council have got that fund, that if it is something like homelessness, that we've got the funds then to be able to support it, rather than go, we haven't got anything here, we can't deal with those issues there. I would like us to think about, I hear this term value for money bandied around quite a lot, and it keeps coming up in meetings here, and I wonder if we could talk about value for residents rather than value for money, because our motto is putting residents first, and if we're only continuously talking about value for money, we're looking at it in terms of a bottom line issue rather than the double bottom line, which is the residents.
Thank you. Any other questions? I can't see any. In which case is the committee happy to... Sorry, Kerry, did you want to say anything before I close? No? Okay. Can the committee note the context of the reports? Thank you very much. Thank you to Ian and Kerry. Move on to our next item, which is the Statement of Gambling Policy Consultation. And Daniel, you'll be giving the presentation. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members of the committee. It's nice to see you. So here I'm going to give a short overview of the presentation about gambling, and specifically the review of our Statement of Gambling Policy. I'm not going to go through the whole report, but essentially the Gambling Act came in 2005. It was enforced in September 2007, and it basically regulates arcades, betting shops, bingo premises, casinos, gaming machines, society lotteries, and remote gambling as well. The Gambling Commission is the main regulator, and the licensing authority play a supporting role. Why are we here? Well, the licensing authority are obliged to review their policy every 3 years. Our most current one was issued in 2019, and therefore it requires adopting. Where are we in the process? Well, 1st of September 2022, the new draft went to the Cabinet. They agreed the consultation for a 6-week period, which started on the 12th of October and due to close on the 24th of October. We've already had the full licensing committee, where a similar presentation was put forward to the committee. No major issues there. There was some discussions from the chairman about asking for data from the trade about self-exclusion, age verification, which we're still compiling. We're happy to provide this committee when we've got that. As I said, today there's another scrutiny committee meeting. Consultation ends on the 24th of October. We've consulted widely, as with any review of any licensing policy, so the trade associations, residents associations, members, responsible authorities under the Gambling Act, and also anyone we think would be effective by the changes in these policies. So what changes have been proposed? The full list is in Appendix A, pages 27 and 28, and in addition you've got the full draft, quite a chunky document of the changes of that policy. What we did do when we were assessing it was we looked at the current policy, see if it still served us and is still workable. Also, we looked at documents such as the Guidance for the Licensing Authority, which was last updated in May 2021, the Gambling Commission's document Licensing Conditions and Codes of Practice, which was last updated in October 2020, and also a policy paper review by the government, which was done in 2020, Terms of Reference and Calls for Evidence. And essentially, the upshot for it is no major changes in terms of the Gambling Act and no major changes in terms of relevant guidance. What I would say is where we have seen the changes, they don't directly affect licensing policies and local authorities. Most of the changes are to do with remote gambling, online gambling, and an increase in that sector, which is mainly covered by the Gambling Commission. What we've actually seen is a decrease in what we cover, and that's land-based premises in the borough, which has been a decline, which is evident in the applications that we're receiving, a reduction there, and especially after COVID as well. But what we have done is try to improve our policy and make it more well-rounded. I won't go through the major details. I'll just summarise some of the key things that we think are helpful. We emphasise more on partnership working, test purchasing and enforcement, We've expressly put sections about the equality duty, modern day slavery, the concept of primary authority. We've also mentioned advertising and human rights. We've also consulted with legal and finance. There's no major issues there. Legal will take a view afterwards when the consultation's closed if we need their advice, and finance, there's no adverse comments from them. That's mainly because the fees have remained the same as statutory since 2025 when it came in. They're just set statutory. So that's an overview of the report. I'm happy to take any questions or queries, but those would be my submissions for the moment, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gardner?
I'll be really brief. No, this is a really good document. We went through it with a fine-tooth comb at the licensing committee. I'm really pleased about the equality and the human rights thing, because we have in the past been worried about the modern day slavery in terms of people working in the premises. I mean, it's all round good piece of work, incredibly lengthy. Thank you, Daniel.
That's very kind, Councillor. It's not the most exciting piece of work, but what we have is, with those additions that you've mentioned, we've tried to look forward and think about, okay, what is topical right now and what will mesh with other parts of the council, and particularly the modern day slavery, because we will be out and about and we can pass that to our colleagues, and we plan to work closely with the Gambling Commission and immigration as well. So that's our thought process there.
Councillor Gohill?
Thank you, Chairman. You said there were some policy issues or things that you're changing, some minor things that you were changing, and it hasn't been sort of implemented or reproduced yet because you're still working through it with your team. When it is, could you bring it forward to the committee just so we have a clear picture of everything?
Yeah, those are the ones that I've listed are the main changes, but from, if you're referring to what I said about the licensing committee, yeah, our chairman was very sort of particular on that and asked for data in terms of, if I'm smiling here, I don't know, that's a private joke or something, about age verification. They're important aspects, age verification and self-exclusion, because I think in his mind he wanted to see what areas is it problematic. So what I plan to do, and what I haven't received back, is go to branches or chains like William Hill, Ladbrokes, and if they're willing to provide that information, they're not obliged to, that will give us an idea of what the problematic parts of the borough are. But what I would say in terms of problems, well, we haven't received, I've certainly been here 3 years, so that's a nice round number, but when the Act came in, hardly any complaints, and our applications have really, really sort of slowed down, and that reflects the view of it all pushing on to sort of like online and moving away from land-based premises.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Daniel. That's an easy night for you.
Oh, thank you, Chairman.
Oh, no, you're on the next one, aren't you? Okay, thank you very much. We'll note that then. And that brings us on to our next item, which is the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Development. And Ian, you'll be giving the presentation. A warm welcome to you this evening.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so the report that you have outlines, we've referred to it as a reset of the Safer Hillingdon Partnership, which is the statutory community safety partnership for Hillingdon. And rather, we've referred to it as a reset, but it's really just setting to make sure that it's in line with legislation. So it's around the strategic needs that the board has to have, the structure it needs to have, in line with best practice as well for a community safety partnership. And also taking in note of the fact that there's a community safety partnership review from the Home Office, which we fed into a very early stage into that process, and what we expect to come out of that. So it just kind of brings it back into line, resets the partnership, because there's a lot of new responsibilities being allocated to community safety partnerships, such as the upcoming serious violence duty, which we expect to come into play next year. We have the combating drugs strategy, which is the from harm to hope guidance, and that again is a strategic lead on that is the community safety partnership as part of that, and of course domestic abuse, and making sure that reports up through the Safer Hillingdon, and making sure that we have all of the so what it outlines is predominantly the responsible authority, so the core membership of a community safety partnership as it stands. The structure, the priorities as we would see them, in terms of a completed needs assessment, how that would do, what the annual process for the partnership would be, then agreeing the priorities, the performance measures to come to this committee as well, which are another important aspect, but ones that we think can be more accountable for, that can be influenced and can be changed, and we can make a difference in across some of those new areas, in particular because they've come on board. It's particularly to reflect those as well. So you'll see that we've put a bit of a pyramid there, some suggested structure to the priorities, which is to have 3 overarching strategic ones with underpinning themes. The reason for that, Chair, is that the likelihood is the strategic headline ones wouldn't change over the 3 years, but the underpinning issues possibly would with everything else. So it's not to have too much change in that, because it doesn't help you focus when you're looking at that and creating that strategic document and trying to simplify that. And that's a practice that you see nationally as well in terms of that as well. So really it's about that reset, bringing it back on board, making sure we've got the right membership across all of the parts of the structure and how we engage, right down to local engagement and local engaged hubs from that which we're hoping to create within that sort of the full gambit as it were within there. That's really it. I think happy to take any thoughts, comments, questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. I thought you would. Councillor Gardner.
I'm very predictable. On page 100 at the top, where it says typical community safety partnership membership, which departments are involved? Because I noticed that obviously this commission doesn't deal with social services or education, but they're vital in terms of most of the themes actually that are on the chart on page 101.
So in terms of the actual board, so you'll see I've suggested safeguarding partnership as the kind of the social services element to that. Beneath that, you're quite right, social services, safeguarding, etc. would be involved throughout the rest of the structure. This is literally the core function of a board that we're required to have by our legislation. So you would see education, hopefully I would expect you to see those on the business support group, which will sit just underneath the strategy group. On the domestic abuse forum, if they're not there now, they will be as we go forward. Certainly they're in Prevent, across the Prevent forums. And anywhere we think so, we did actually review and say they need to be on the drugs, the Combating Drugs Partnership, which is just a new forum. So we'd like to see them right across that strip. And then anywhere else where there would be, so education definitely throughout. We engage with schools as well outside of that, and universities, etc., colleges through the outgoing work. At the strategic level, I have no qualms about us inviting the local education authority on or getting the right strategic representation. It's all up for review, Councillor, so certainly something, if we can get the right person at that right level, I can't see why we couldn't have them on. And we can reflect that in any changes that we go forward with happily.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gordon, do you wish to follow up?
Yeah, on page 100 again, under the diagrams, it says recommend the strategic intelligent assessment. Who will be doing the actual assessment?
The minute it's been completed by, it was already completed by Edge Consultancy, who came in and did a huge piece of consultancy work before I got in there. There's no need to re-engage that. We're going to take the work that they've done, any other data we can collect in-house, and just compare that to what Edge have done. We already have some thoughts around what the priorities look like they're going to come out around that. You're right, there's a lack of analytical capacity in terms of that. We do work with colleagues in performance team to make sure that we can do something with that. But we'll take the Edge consultancy this year. Going forward, we need to look at how we're going to do that longer term, though, because it's an annual undertaking.
Thank you, Councillor Gohill.
Thank you. Just to say, I think this community safety partnership is a great idea, and I like the idea of joining up our services together. But I also think it's just to note. I also think it's really important to keep the annual reviews and kind of make sure that they're really consistent, because but it was said in bold here, are the strategic priorities still fit for purpose? Year by year, these will change. I think it's really, really key to keep reviewing that and seeing if we are still delivering what's best for our communities and our residents. So thanks for all the hard work you're doing as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it should be part of a core function of a community safety partnership to review itself on an annual basis and put itself forward to be held to account really by a select committee, in particular for that process as well.
Thank you, Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I just question how the Hillingdon Safer Neighbourhood Board fits into this. Obviously, Councillor Sullivan and I are council appointees to that board. Obviously, that's very important how we liaise with community policing in our wards and on our ward panels. And I just wondered how that would fit into this, because I can't see how it would fit in currently in the diagrams.
At the moment, it would be Jean Hillman. Yep, who's sitting on as a member of the Safer Hillingdon Partnership as a representative. We are looking at how we better improve the links across that, and I mentioned localities earlier. Again, how that improves and feeds in, because we've got to make sure that we're not being counterproductive across those meetings and across those processes.
Do you wish to follow up? No. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. On page 102, you talk about resident benefit. Could you explain in a bit more detail, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Microphone. What did I say? Yes. So, part of what we're looking to do, and I've said, is make sure that within the structure of the partnership, from the strategic board down to the local engagement level, so we're looking at locality-based hubs. We don't know how they're defined yet. We haven't defined those locality-based hubs yet. We're looking at how they, we have to be coterminous with police colleagues and various other services, and also how they link into things like community hubs and those. So part of that residents' benefit would be more engagement from us at a local level, more involvement into sort of co-production of documents. So when we go forward and have the priorities, we need to have that public meeting, we need to have that consultation with residents around, are these the priorities to the map, what you think, and how we got to that stage. Because I think if we don't explain how we reach the stage of those priorities, people will make their own, because they won't understand why we came to that and what the reason being is. So part of it's that, to build that. We're looking at that kind of more resilient community. So when we talk about education, trying to get that into with our residents as well is important. We're looking at predominantly the preventative space. So rather than being a reactive service, the benefit of the community, we think, is that preventative space. We want to understand the problems, understand the communities, and try, and rather than keep reacting to them, try and prevent them happening again once we've dealt with them. So a long-term strategy, if you like, rather than that kind of short-termism. Is that a word?
Yep.
Would that involve residents' associations and things like that? Thank you.
It categorically would. They're intrinsic to that kind of locality-based engagement. How we do it is important as well. It could be through current forums, if you like, board panels, could be through independent advisory groups and anything that's existing, but also looking at creating representation perhaps on the localities hubs as well within that. So yeah, again, all up for grabs, yeah.
Councillor Punjab.
Thank you, Ian. When I heard you speak at the training session, I was really pleased, actually. I'm really happy that we are taking and looking at preventative space, because I think that is much needed and always a way of combating any kind of issues to create safer neighbourhoods. It's always better to look at how we can alleviate it rather than how we react to it. There were two things that I wanted to look at. Is when we're looking at this Edge consultancy that has come in and done this, were they looking at how we operate as a council, or were they looking at what was going on the ground in local areas? Also, area by area, and you talk about localities, area by area, you're shape-shifting, literally shape-shifting. And one of the biggest reasons for that shape-shifting is housing and how people are living. Because in every area where you have got a density of crime, violence, abuse, it is usually down to the way people live. And almost a ghettoising of how people live as well. And you will find that in our borough. And this is going to be a greater task, because you can't change the housing situation, because that is planning and that is already been set out for you. So I wonder how, going forward, that you can enable a different kind of consciousness shift around planning to create safer neighbourhoods from the onset, rather than as a reactive process to the crime that's built up in the community. I know that's a bigger question on a whole, but housing is a massive, and how people live is a massive issue in everything that you've done, because you've got your 3 priorities there, and underneath all of that, every single one of them is going to be about how people live and where they live.
Yeah, so dealing with chaotic people, chaotic lifestyles, displacement of issues is going to be key to that. I think I said in the training, one of the issues that we involve is when developments happen, people often develop, for an example, a play area without looking at the demographics of the area that they're looking at. And so you end up with a play area that's redundant and only attractive to antisocial behaviour, for instance, rather than attractive to the cause it was meant for, because the age group was wrong. So you put something in that's wrong. So part of what we need to be doing is making sure we understand the communities, we understand what the needs are rather than what the money tells us we can buy. And doing that, so looking at the profiles of the area, a big challenge because it surrounds by analytic capacity again, but generally you would do a problem profile, for want of a better term, of those areas, or an area profile actually, of what the issues are, and that's all of the socio-economic factors, all of those health factors in there, and the demographics linked to what our crime data is telling us and what you need in that area. So that's the preventative bit in that long term. You're also always going to have reactive parts of that service, and we need to be able to do that. You're ever shifting game, because whenever we resolve an issue, particularly in housing and dysfunctional housing areas, for instance, we move it somewhere else. And if it's within our borough, it's still our responsibility to try and deal with that and look at that and manage that. So we'll be going back to the basics of estate and neighbourhood management, really. That's the fundamentals that we need to look at, which is part of what the localities model looks at, that kind of fundamentals of estate management, seeing how we deal with antisocial behaviour on one hand, the issues of environmental issues on the other, housing enforcement and housing, and more engagement with social. So those local hubs I mentioned should engage with our hopefully decent registered social landlords. There'll always be the big gap of the ones that just do not engage. But that's where we're hoping to improve that engagement on an ongoing basis, where we can get a little bit ahead of what's happening and get on top of it, because otherwise we're always going to be on the back foot. I think it's a long-term aim, if I'm honest, Councillor, so, but that's where it's been effective in other areas across the country, that's what's happened. It's we're getting ahead of that in that ongoing kind of process. It's quite difficult across London boroughs, because all the boroughs are so closely knit across, and you get crossover from one borough into us and out of us into others. And then, of course, we've got the difference in the areas, affluent or otherwise, which presents slightly different challenges in and around each one, but nonetheless still significant challenges no matter where you are. We just need to understand it. I think it's that problem thing, and not understand the problem. That.
Councillor Punja?
I really welcome your look at value for residents over value for money. I really do. I think that's really important to tackling this issue.
Councillor Gardner.
A couple of things. The police have a design out crime thing that they use. I mean, they're doing that in some of the big new developments in Hayes. We instigated that. With the exception of 2 or 3 of these, all these cover domestic abuse, don't they? The reduced crime, violence reduction, antisocial behaviour, reoffending and offending, protecting vulnerable people, modern slavery. I'm also slightly concerned, but I think I'm not just sure about the extremist activity. Reduce harm caused by drugs and alcohol, sexual exploitation. I think all bar about 2 or 3 are related to domestic abuse in all its forms. No, it just happens to be my own interest in life. Also, have you considered local safe spaces? We've got some new developments, well, in my ward, and I know they've got them in several other wards, where I think the estate managers will be open to letting people go in and, you know, chill out or whatever, or just relax for a couple of hours, like they did with chemists. Have you have considered that, yes?
Considering everything, Councillor, in terms of good practice, things like safe spaces, etc. And you're quite right to point out the fact that there's some intrinsic links across those subject areas, particularly when you look around down the vulnerability line, if you like. And that's the key to it, is actually, you know, there's some well-proven and understood links now around exploitation and domestic abuse, and how we tackle that, around radicalisation actually and domestic abuse, again, modern slavery as part of exploitation actually. And then again with the drugs issues, again you can link that and substance misuse. You can also link that to county lines as well and some of those issues. So what we're trying to do is make sure there's a more coordinated approach to everything that we do, and we understand those links around that. The radicalisation is kind of really, we are in the prevent space. Not just because it is prevent in its title, but because that's where we need to be. We don't want people to be radicalised. We want to get in that early intervention and stop that and do what we can. And Fiona and her team do a really good job around that. We're just trying to build the links with that so that it's stronger in with our service, so that actually whatever links are there, we improve them and we strengthen them, and we strengthen them across those services. So that's why it's built into there, because that will always be that. So you're right to recognise that, and yeah, safe spaces are a great piece of work, and anything we can do to improve anything in around that journey or otherwise for a resident or someone who's, you know, it would be great if it was there were potential and we stopped them becoming a victim and we didn't have that harm, and that's where we need to be. We need to be getting in there and getting it early, I think, and that's the kind of design that we want. We don't want to be having to deal with people who suffer. We want to have to be able to stop them from suffering, if that makes sense. Of course, we'll always be set up for those who are there, but we, you know, it'd be great if we could stop anybody's harm.
Councillor Gardner, do you want to just add anything further before we finish?
Yeah, something that has concerned me for some considerable time is a lot of the RSLs do not have a domestic violence policy attached, or if they have, they don't implement it. If there's a perpetrator who's thrown the victim out, they, well, I know for a fact that they won't do anything about the perpetrator. We end up picking up the victim, where in actual fact she should be in the house and the perpetrator should move. Is there, and are you working with or thinking about working with the RSLs on that?
Yeah, anything we can do to improve our engagement with RSLs is always an advantage right across the subject matter. So I'm having a conversation with Mark Billings, the Director of Housing, really in improving our links and how we can get that. Our expectation would be that an RSL would have domestic abuse linked into their tenancy agreement. That would be the expectation, and so that you're right, that the potential victim or the victim actually gets priority over the perpetrator, and we've got to try and push that. We need to engage better. If we're having that issue, we need to see how we engage better. I don't have an instant answer to it, other than we just need to keep plugging away to try and improve that engagement with them, the RSLs. It could be the landlords forum. We just need to get into any forum we can to get engagement going. So I'm kind of working with Mark to see how we do that. Safe accommodation, obviously we've been working with Mark around that and how that happens, and how we allocate accommodation is one of the things I know Mark is particularly aware of, that we do it because we can allocate the private across boroughs. It's how we follow that through is the challenge around that. How we track, when we've allocated that, how do we track that individual to make sure that everything we've agreed is in place. So quite an in-depth piece of work around that. We want to try and capture that in the new strategy actually, when that comes out, about how we do that, so make sure we hold ourselves to account. But it should always be challenged.
Thank you very much. As you'll note in our work programme, we are due to have further updates on this in November and March, the SHP, so there'll be plenty more occasions to add further questions and scrutiny to that. Taking into consideration what's been said, do we note the report and endorse the new arrangements as a committee? Thank you very much.
We can't endorse them, can we?
That was a recommendation.
No, it might be, but I don't think we can endorse them.
Outlined in the report. Page 99.
No, I know.
Committee recommendation
I'm
2.
struggling a little bit with that, with the second recommendation. What do you think? Shall we endorse it? I don't know. Okay.
So for now, sort of meet halfway, shall we just note the content of the report then?
Please.
Okay. Is the committee happy with that? Okay. That's fine. In which case the committee will just note the report on this occasion. Thank you very much. Item 9 is the fly tipping, fly posting and select boards. Ian and also Joanne on this occasion. So good evening to you, Joanne. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation on this one as well.
Thank you. I'm Joanne from the Antisocial Behaviour and Environment team. I've obviously prepared the report on 3 issues: fly tipping, fly posting and select boards. I'm sure that you've all read it, councillors, and I don't need to go through the report hand by hand, but we are looking at new innovative ways to handle enforcement in terms of fly tipping, because that's quite prevalent across the borough at the moment. So we're working with our colleagues in the CCTV room. We've introduced new target intelligent packages on trying to identify repeat offenders and obviously taking enforcement action in respect of that. We did have a really high profile case recently, and we had a prolific fly tipper who was convicted and sentenced to prison for 21 months. So that was a good result and a lot of hard work by one of the officers. So we are looking at ways to improve and deal with fly tipping. I realise that a lot of it is down to education and obviously informing residents and making sure that they're aware of how to store the waste, where to recycle, and obviously the enforcement is the last option when they're not listening or they refuse to acknowledge that there are things in place for them to dispose of their waste properly and correctly.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I'll start with questions then. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Joanne. First of all, fly tipping is the sort of bane of my existence. I absolutely hate it. It's disgusting. It makes our community look ugly. I absolutely hate it. What I'd say is in my ward in particular, we have Brunel University, and we have a seasonal fly tipping problem, sort of when students move out, new students move in type thing. Just kind of surrounding, and I appreciate this is ward specific rather than borough specific, just sort of surrounding the university. Just when I've driven past, at least there's plenty of CCTV across the campus. Do you work with the university's team to see if people in vans turn up and and then see if those same vans later fly tip? Do you kind of liaise with the CCTV between the university and CCTV that you have on the streets? And the second question is, sorry, I should have said I had 2, if that's okay, Chairman. The second question is, I wasn't aware of all of the fines that are are in place, and I'm sure many others aren't as well. Are we perhaps advertising this better? Is there any scope to kind of publish it more, maybe in Hillingdon People magazine or some of the other resources Council has?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the university, Brunel University, there's my opposites in Brunel University that I liaise with, and obviously any information comes through to us in terms of students. The problems we have is that they're transient, so they will move out, and then it's left to the landlords to dispose of the items within the house, and more often than not they get dumped onto the road, and then that would be the landlord's responsibility. They should enforce that with their tenants. If their tenants aren't prepared to get rid of the waste as they should, then that will fall down to them, and those are the people that we will engage with if they don't remove it, or if we've got to take action and get it removed, then obviously we will take enforcement against them.
Anything further you wish to add to Councillor Gale?
Just on the second question I had on if we could perhaps advertise these fines better to really kind of reinforce our zero tolerance approach, maybe in Hillingdon People magazine or anything further. Is that being looked into?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we're using social media as well. So what we're doing is when we get CCTV footage from our room at the council, if we don't know the identity of the offender, we will advertise that on social media and get people to come forward. We'll also give it to the police. We use our environmental enforcement team to go out. And more often than not, you will find in areas like particularly like East Avenue or Denslow or Gledwood Drive, it's the same people dropping the waste all the time. And it's about us picking up where they're coming from or if they're using a vehicle, and then obviously the inquiries and the investigation that goes into that, and then if we can identify them, then that's when we take the enforcement action. If they become repeat offenders, then we would look at prosecution at court. But legal advisors, in the first instance, we should take the fixed penalty route, give them an opportunity, and then pursue it further if we need to.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Estate agent boards. Could you let me know if the 14-day rule applies in the London Borough of Hillingdon as it does in other boroughs, please?
Yes, Councillor, it does. Obviously, if they're placed onto private property, in terms of actions we can take, it's different if it's placed onto council property or street furniture that we directly own, and we can take direct action straight away. But in terms of it's on private property, it's 14 days, and then they should remove them.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Sullivan?
Yes, just another one. Fly posting. Does this only apply to let boards, or does for sale boards come into the equation too?
All estate agents boards come into the equation. In the first instance, if they are on council property, we have to warn them to say you must remove them within a specified amount of time. If they fail to do that, then we will take action from there.
If I could just add to Councillor Sullivan's point regarding fly posting on your report, page 108, you've actually merged the number of cases with to let boards and fines for fly posting. I would be interested to know how many of those were estate agents. So if I could just add that as an action point to be done outside this meeting, if they could provide me with further information, and to other committee members exactly how many of those 74 were related to estate agents, that would be appreciated. Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got some comments, actually. So I appreciate you're looking at CCTV footage. Like Councillor Gohill, fly tipping is a bane of my life too. And what I've noticed is actually how the hotspots of fly tipping change. And what I have noticed is that actually it's where the cameras aren't that the fly tipping actually happens. So therefore, I know that in Newsley we don't have as many cameras really, and we have a huge crime and we have huge problems with fly tipping. And I would welcome more CCTV cameras in that area so that we could actually deal with that, although I find them quite intrusive at the same time. The other thing we have is industrial sites that are actually getting rid of their waste into our canals and waterways, into our rivers, onto our parks and lands and into our streets. And they know they can't be caught because nobody can see them. So that is a really big problem, and I don't know if that happens elsewhere as well. And then there's the last thing as well, the kind of support that we could offer those private landowners and private estates, because there are certain areas which were, you know, planned and built up 20 years ago or something like that. They were quite open spaces, really lovely. And then as the area has become overdeveloped and built on, you've got people being able to access private properties and just tip in car parks and stuff like that. And then they're being told that they can't do anything about it. So the homeowners who live in that estate then have to have their service charges being put towards cleaning up this mess. And how can we support those estates that are, through no fault of their own, are encountering this kind of antisocial behaviour? And I think that's really important, because people are having extortionate costs in removing this, and they can't, and we need to kind of support it if we are going to build up areas where there are going to be open accesses to areas, and not have kind of sufficient then screenings around those places and hotspots.
It is difficult, and I appreciate it's difficult for private residents and private landlords who've got properties like that. The issue we have is that if we clear it, then the council will end up paying, and it comes out of the resources available to us, and then we would seek to recover from landlords or private residents. In terms of putting things in place to stop people going on to parks, we could put concrete bollards. We've looked at those before, because I know sometimes with the travelling community, when they come onto a site, they will absolutely fly tip it and then disappear, and it leaves whoever owns the property £80,000 to £100,000 to clear it, which is a huge amount of money. The difficulty we have is in catching them. We're working with the Environment Agency at the moment. They've got a long-term programme going on, and we're sharing information, intelligence, people coming onto the borough and going onto other boroughs and then moving across, because it's a commercial business for them. You know, they can pick up a load for £200 and then cash, and then they will dump it onto somebody's property, and then that person's got the responsibility of removing it. It's really difficult to know what support we can actually offer them in terms of preventing that for them. That would be down to them, because it's their private property. We do try and offer support to them where we can, and if in instances, I know since I've been with the ASB team, we have removed waste from private residents' properties where they've had it just dumped in their driveway through no fault of their own. And then when we've sought to prosecute, we will look to get the compensation costs and the court costs back for that. But we're certainly trying to get it out there more in terms of, as the council pointed out earlier, in terms of highlighting what we're doing and what the punishments are if you get caught and things like that. So, and working with the police as well. So we're doing waste carrier operations around the borough, where we're identifying vehicles being used in fly tips, and then we can seize them. So we've done that as well. So that's what we're looking at the moment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smallwood? No? Okay. Councillor Gardner?
Are your staff proactive when they go out? Because there are lots of those, I suppose they're fly posting, that are put on with those tags on things. I mean, I've reported quite a lot, and in fact I've got to the stage where I go out tooled up periodically and remove them, because you can't just rip them off if they've got those tags on them. But do your staff actually go out, and do they proactively look for things like that?
Yes, Councillor, we do. And our environmental enforcement team, we task them to regularly patrol areas, take down any signs, and then if there's inquiries we can do in terms of what the posters that have been removed, so it might be for scrap cars or things like that, across the borough, we will try and do some investigations and inquiries into that to see if we can identify. We've got one ongoing at the moment who's quite prolific across the borough, who we've identified, and we're trying to take the respective action in terms of him.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Gardner? Or you okay. Councillor Nelson West, I saw you smiling at me. Was that an indication, or was you just smiling?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, there's a lot of repeat offenders in Chapel Ward, for instance, and in different streets. And the signs would say no dumping of waste. And I think a lot of it is waste is being cleared, it's getting cleared by the council or whatever. And then, of course, next day it's back there again. Not a big amount, but some people think, and they keep dumping it because they know it's going to get cleared the next day. We think that's a lot of problem. And is it Charlie? Is it on the CCTV? Has told me there's not enough cameras or mobile cameras around? I think there's only 7. I think is it mobile? I can't remember now. He did tell me. I got it written down somewhere. And so I think we do need more cameras or whatever. But when people are putting underneath the sign that says no dumping, clear it. Next day it's back again, and it's just a bane. And then most of my MPs are clearing rubbish. I could do with more. This is prominent, but all the same time, just putting the same MPs about the same areas all the time, and it's just time consuming. It's to me it's wasting my time because I'm not really doing some other work. Or this is obviously work you need to be done, but it just makes it all good.
Thank you, Councillor. It's difficult. It is like a repeat cycle, like you said. Our waste services will clear it, and they'll think, okay, that's fine, I can just put it out. It's about education as well. So we do send out advisory letters saying, this is what you need to do, this is your collection date, this is when you should be putting your things out. If you don't and you're caught, then these are the options available to us in terms of enforcement. The cameras are great, and but the issue we have with them is identifying the people from the CCTV image. That's the issue we have. They're great as a deterrent because people may think twice about depositing there because there's a camera there looking at them. The issue is they get very clever, so they won't use their vehicle to come along because they know we can trace information through that way. So it's about finding new innovative ways of dealing with that and making sure residents are educated in terms of what they need to do in terms of their rubbish, and also to highlight to us if they see somebody or they witness something, then please let us know and we will have a look into it and see what we can do.
Councillor Nelson West, do you wish to follow up?
Yes, I just say that maybe some people are going out there and have more body cams, like and try and catch people that way with some body cams maybe. I've had people that sit in my car and next thing stuff being thrown out of a car next to me. If I had a camera, I could have stopped him or whatever.
Body-worn cameras are available. They're obviously, Charlie from the CCTV room, we do have body-worn cameras there that we can use, and also the environmental enforcement team do wear body-worn cameras when they're out and about. Thank you.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. Just quickly on cross-borough fly tipping. We share boundaries with Ealing, Hounslow and Harrow. Do you work with the antisocial behaviour departments in the respective boroughs for people who might pick up trash in one borough and drop it in ours, or maybe indeed vice versa?
Yes, we do. We work with our counterparts over in the other boroughs, and obviously, as I indicated earlier, if the travelling community are moving through boroughs, then we will be notified of where and when they are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure how body-worn cameras would catch fly tippers unless you were sort of hiding in a bush and then jumped out. Not really sure they're going to be the answer to all of our problems. But just in relation to cameras, I think whilst I'm happy for them to be put in prime places and act as a deterrent, I do recognise that the police and the council have a huge problem prosecuting and actually getting an outcome by just camera equipment. Because as you said, the people who are causing the most problems are not just somebody who goes, I've got something in the back of my car, I'll just shove it on the side of the road. These are people who are potentially clever in the way that they go about doing this. So I'd hesitate to just say that cameras were completely the answer, and I agree with Councillor Punja, we don't necessarily want our lives completely cameraed all the time. So concerned about how body-worn cameras would work in catching fly tippers, and conscious that it is still very difficult to prosecute when we do use them. But if they can be used as a deterrent, which I know they have been in hotspots in the borough, having visited the CCTV room, I think that's very, very important. But I think the innovative ways that you're coming up with will catch more and get more prosecutions than necessarily just using a camera as an answer.
Thank you. I mean, the body-worn cameras are used when our officers go out, and they are going out with targeted packages to highlight the offenders, and then they will speak to them, and then obviously whatever occurs with their conversation is recorded, so it's admissible for us for prosecution purposes later on. But you're right, it's only as helpful or useful as if we can identify the offenders from them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Punjar.
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to echo something that Councillor Gohill said about the cross-borough, but the other thing that I wanted to kind of say is that I feel that sometimes it is almost like there's a business going on in terms of the way people are fly tipping, because it does feel like there's lots of, especially in industrial estates, that there are businesses that are actually fly tipping because it costs them less to fly tip than it does to dispose of their waste. And I don't know the cost of kind of disposing of this kind of waste at all, but I just wonder if that's something that needs to be kind of addressed and looked at in how we education, innovation. I think prevention is always better than kind of arming people with enforcements, but education across all areas, because I think the businesses themselves, and it's not just people and residents, but I do think businesses need to be educated as well, that this is not a responsible way of reducing, because I'm just seeing so much business waste, as much as you're seeing mattresses and the rest of it going on in our ward.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a business for some people in terms of not having the correct documentation to deposit waste, or they will just put it anywhere across the borough because it's easy to do. It is a problem, and we are looking at ways to try and combat that. And like I said, we're working with the Environment Agency and Cross-Borough as well to look at new ways to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions before we finish? Okay. Thank you very much, Joanne. And I think that's it for now. We'll move now on to item 10, which is our forward plan. Pages. Thank you so much. But I think we need to have the endorsement of the whole committee, not just you, Councillor. Can we agree with that?
I like the picture of us, Janet.
I appreciate your enthusiasm, though.
Oh, you see, you didn't see
see?
the
No, you've noticed it now. Forget it.
in the work programme.
So the work programme is item 11, the last one, pages 123 to 128. What I would just say on the work programme, as you see this tonight, I did get a witness here from my ward, Hillingdon East. Of course, the world doesn't revolve around Hillingdon East, as great as it is. If you do have witnesses who you'd like to come before this committee, by all means, please suggest them to Liz. She will contact them and liaise with them if it's regarding the issue that we're looking at. Of course, we've got the alligating scheme, so if you've got any residents, it'd be good to see them come before this committee as well. Councillor Smord?
Fly tipping may be the bane of some of my colleagues' lives, but the emails I receive are mainly around flooding in and around Woodland, in and around Ruislip. I just wondered if, I'm conscious that we have a local flood risk management strategy, and I'm also very conscious that Councillor Lavery is doing good work in reorganising how the borough looks at flooding issues. Could we have just like, I also recognise that there's a consultation. It's one of the few things where we have a consultation other than the budget. Could we just have a clear outline of when this is going to consultation, what it is, etc., etc. I believe it's coming to us. It's coming here in November and going to Cabinet in January. I might have got that wrong, but it would just be clear to have a clear timeline of what's being consulted, when it's being consulted, how it's being consulted, so that we can potentially get good witnesses engaged with good local bodies, the EA, Thames Water, etc., etc.
Liz, are you happy to note that?
Yes, that's noted, Chairman.
Okay. And you also know our committee site visits. So I know a few of you have been on these little school trips now. It'd be good to hear some feedback of how you felt they went. We do have some other ones planned as well. But if anyone has any feedback, it'd be welcome. I know I went to the Heathrow one 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, that was very informative. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend the others. I know you attended Waste Services with Councillor Gardner. I had a very happy morning together. How did that go?
Yeah, I have to say I've actually found them very helpful to kind of fit in the sort of live, what actually goes on in the background. Often, sometimes our roles can be enthusiastic, and how enthusiastic the staff were about the jobs that they're doing in the borough, and how high morale was, which I didn't expect to be any different, but it was very, very positive. And I think we all took away some very positive things, and were able to give some ideas and direct feedback at those meetings. So I think as many of them as we can do is great, and I think it's a good example. She was lovely. Yeah.
We'll come to that in a minute. So thank you for that. The next actual site visit, I think, is Hillingdon Fire Station. We've arranged that for December, haven't we?
Yes, Chairman, we're looking at the 7th of December. That's TBC, but it's probably going to be the 7th of December in the morning for anyone who is available.
Thank you very much. Also, if you do have any other ideas for frontline visits, do let Liz know and myself. We'll be happy to try and get them arranged for you, as long as it's within the remit of the committee. So just going back onto the recommendations on the front page, in terms of the work programme, you'll see that point 2, following the Empty Homes Premium Minor Review, that the Resident Service Select Committee considers undertaking a major review of allocating in the borough. We did look into the suggestions that were given by members previously, and we looked into them with officers. I know Liz did a lot of work behind the scenes. This was the one that we could go with straight after the review into the empty homes. Obviously, I know we mentioned housing department, didn't we, which was under review internally. That's why we couldn't go ahead with it. So this is really the only one left that we can go ahead with at this stage. Is the committee happy with that? And if so, can we proceed to arrange that as part of our major review? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our business for this evening then, everyone. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening. Have a safe journey home, and I'll see you all soon. Good night.